Now, on Thursday, the Vatican confirmed that Pope Francis will visit Ireland in August of next year, the first Pope to do so since John Paul II. And that was fairly momentous, it has to be said, but I don't think that the fallout was what was expected. Anyway, so much has changed since then, but 90% of primary schools in Ireland remain owned and under the patronage of the Catholic Church. The filmmaker Lenny Abrahamson wants to change that and has become an ambassador for Educate Together. Now, you will be known for bringing glory on yourself and all of the rest of us for your Oscar and the film Room and what Richard did, Adam and Paul, etc., etc., etc. What's this with Educate Together?
Well, it's just, in the way of things, having children and moving on in life and trying to decide where we would send them. And, not being from the majority background, but also, not being religious really at all. I'd heard about Educate Together, and I particularly knew the school in Ranelagh, which is we're in the catchment area of. And so just started to do a bit of research and put our kids' names down very quickly when they were born. Luckily got in, and then have just really loved the experience that they've been having there. And the more I think about it, the more it seems to me, if we're to make a difference, if you're to make a difference to a society, there's no better place than in the early years of a child's life. I mean, education is one of the most formative kind of aspects of a person's development, so especially early education. So to have a positive experience and to have an experience which is joyful and inclusive and, where there's an ethical dimension to it and where there's a sort of democratic atmosphere in the school, as well as, all the academic stuff that you expect.
But do the religious schools also have ethical values? I mean, that's what it's all about.
I think the problem, I suppose, is just that, you look at the admissions policy, so it's access is one issue.
Yeah.
But also, say you're a child, say access was even solved, say there was no sort of preferential, you would still have a situation where the ethical or the sort of the extra educational dimension would be split off into people's individual kind of faith backgrounds. And I think the point I feel is most strongly about is that education is the place where we should be bringing kids together. I mean, I've no issue at all with faith-based schools. I just think that their parents should have a right to make a decision to go somewhere else.
Well, in fairness, the Archbishop of Dublin has been supporting that for a number of years. But when you go and you poll in the schools, they haven't wanted change. Now, whether that's just because people don't want change, I don't know. You've Jewish background.
Yeah.
I mean, what was your experience?
So my experience was, if you're a Jewish kid in the 70s, when I was going to school, and into the 80s, I'd quickly add, it was, you tended to sort of be chucked in with the other minority. So as a primary school kid, I went to a parish primary school, to Catholic primary school, and then switched to the high school in Rathgar, which had a junior school, which started in the equivalent of first class, or third class, actually. And that was that was a sort of a Protestant school, so the minorities kind of clung together.
There used to be a very thriving Jewish school. Has that got long gone?
No, there is. It's still there, actually, Stratford College. And I'd have to talk to my parents as to why they decided to go to high school.
Right.
There were quite a lot of other Jewish kids, but the one thing I remember from that experience was that when it came to assembly in the morning, all the kids would go into the main assembly room, there'd be a bit of a hymn and a chat, but we'd go to Jewish prayers. And I just think that idea of, when it comes to the important things in life, I mean, think about the message you're sending, the sort of the most important dimension of life, we separate kids into their faith groups. And I think, for me, I think that's something that should happen outside school. And inside school, we should concentrate on bringing kids together around ideas of tolerance. I mean, we're going to be living in a more and more multicultural, multi-ethnic society.
And typically in your kids' classes now, who are the other children?
Okay, so now we have because our school is in Ranelagh, it's very white
posh.
And quite posh, right? And this is an issue actually across the whole of the primary education system, because we don't have a national enrolment policy. It means that only the parents who get their kids' name down, because there's a big demand for Educate Together. There's like as many kids on the waiting list as are in the schools. You've got to get your kids down fast, so you're the ones in the know. And anyway, that's a very middle class sort of white area.
Yeah.
But having been, and I know that's something that's been in the you know, that's the in quotes other side tend to say, oh, education is tremendously middle class. But actually, I was just out in Balbriggan where there are, I was out in a primary and a secondary educate together, the most diverse group of kids I've had the pleasure to meet in Ireland, and just the energy of the school and the sense of kind of interchange and just the sort of functioning educational community is brilliant to see.
Well, you see, I think this nearly happens more outside Dublin than it does within Dublin. We had somebody on the programme who was on a board of management in Tipperary. It's something like 34 nationalities in their school, you know, which I think is very difficult on the teachers if you think of language, think of all of those
It's remarkable. After a year or so, you suddenly see the kids are all in sort of just, you know, they're just a bunch of kids. Like out in Balbriggan, it was interesting that I think people know the story because in 2007 there was kind of an emergency where
That's right, yeah.
friendship, mostly kids of African origin, hadn't anywhere to go. And so they set up a school. But I have not been in a school as like with as much life and as much kind of a sense just of a sort of dynamic, joyful educational, but totally contrasts with mine.
Right. Henry, where were you educated?
Well, I went first to Headford School near Kells in County Meath. And just listening to you talking, it's just funny. You separate kids into their faith groups. And even the other day, I just happened to be talking to somebody about, I can still remember as a small child walking into Kells every Sunday, and the prods went up the hill and the Catholics turned left. Yeah. And that still sticks. Yeah. And I can still remember...
But is that not fair enough?
I don't...
We'll have now people going to the mosque
It is fair enough, except... Once there's another context in which they're not turning left and going straight.
Yeah, right.
Once there is a place where they can also learn about each other.
But it gets back to your point, which I sort of kind of can see completely, that creates a sense of separateness and difference. But what really interests me with what you were saying was when you use the expression ethical dimension. And I think that if you take faith out of schools, or you take religion out of schools, how do you deal with the ethical dimension? I think that's the real challenge. And I think in terms of, for example, thinking about the Bible, and there are lots of very interesting things to be learnt about the Bible. I think it's a really interesting debate. I think it is something that we need to discuss openly as a society. Yeah. I think that's your views are very refreshing in that respect.
And I agree. I mean,
what percentage of schools are you now?
Well, there's about nearly 90 schools, few secondaries and lots of primaries. Yeah. I think that the key at the moment is if we can get it up to 120, the charity, I mean, becomes sort of self-sustaining, because it's a very small per capita grant.
Can I say something else without meaning to be too provocative, and I won't actually mention the school in question. But I mean, I again talking about where one sent one's children to school, or where one tries to get them sent to school, being is that, you know, well, let's maybe see if we can go to a Church of Ireland school, not because it's Church of Ireland, but because it has a more liberal ethos, and that actually is striking towards your point about an ethical dimension.
Well, indeed,
in my view.
And I think two things about what you say, which and it's very relevant. One is that it's absolutely right and proper to learn about religion. Yeah. And I mean, two things about education. So religions are talked about. They put on a different festival every Christmas. So sometimes it was the Nativity in our school this year, but before that they'll do Diwali or another thing which is connected to other kids in the school. So religion is talked about, and what can be learned from it is talked about. And the other and also the school is available to be used as a facility outside school hours by faith groups. So it's not like anti-religion. The point about a patron body like Educate Together, and there are others trying to do this, is that they do substitute something else for the, if you want to say, missing religious dimension. In other words, there is an active discussion about ethics. There is a way in which the kids learn.
How's that handled?
Well, just first of all, in the relations between the kids and how they deal with it and how they encourage people to see primarily about seeing other people's points of view.
Right.
Thinking about the values in life, so whether they be art or other ways in which people through charity, through help, why would you do that? What is important about other people's experience that it should be valued? In other words, the things that we would like to operate
Values.
in society as a whole.
Yeah.
Values, exactly. And then the thing for me, the other model, which is I think is the community national school model, and to be fair, the church have been very active in this, in that they recognise the problem and they want schools to divest.
Yes.
Their preferred model is the community national school model, in which at the sort of appropriate time, kids break off into their groups, and a person from outside, say for the Muslim community or the Jewish community or whatever, would come in.
Yeah.
And again, my thing is just, I think within school, I would just love that that ethical dimension is something that we all talk about together, because surely that's how you construct a society which is cohesive.
But is that not the background? If you take a lot of rock stars here, who went to religious schools and ended up with a very strong human rights ethic.
Oh, listen, absolutely.
I mean, if you look at what the Roman Catholics did in terms of, Africa, the missions, fantastic record.
Oh, yeah, you can absolutely. People come, and amazing people come from all backgrounds.
That's right.
And there are amazingly wonderful, positive people from a religious viewpoint who do incredible work. I mean, Peter McFerry is another charity that I was involved in. There's no better person than him.
Yeah.
My view is just that, and that we can also say that tremendous bad things have come from those institutions. But we are now not just that. I mean, the problem is, it's not like we have a kind of a strong state educational sector in which some religious groups also have a part. We have this anomalous historical
it is, yeah,
legacy.
based on
and
history.
I think all people are trying to do is to just create one which is open to every kid. I think that even just the optics of that, not being able to get into a school because you don't come from the right background.
Well, I mean, I saw Breed O'Brien writing about that and saying that they claim talking about Educate Together, 26% of the schools either had or were eligible for DESH status. However, only 19% of Educate Together's schools have DESH status. I mean, there are schools across the country which believe they're eligible for DESH status. And then you have the admissions thing. But you see, I remember talking to a Church of Ireland bishop about a school, and there was some big change going to happen in policy in the Department of Education, and he was in a rural area, and he said, look, if we don't have Church of Ireland schools, our kids will never get a chance to meet their co-religionists in a kind of a community way. They will always be a minority in the local school. It made a very compelling argument. You were going to come in there.
I mean, and this is the issue. You quoted Breed O'Brien there about the exclusivity of Educate Together schools, and as they are viewed as perhaps better and more exclusive, white,
totally
middle class
that.
for this. But the challenge for your ethos, this is a challenge for your ethos, because we see with the growth of the Gael Scoilina that parents might select to send their children to Gael Scoilina. But the problem...
Yeah, but I get very cross when people say that's for privilege as well.
It's not.
An awful lot of people. And I went to a Gael School, kids went to Gael School.
Mine too.
And the variety of kids.
It's a really easy argument to make. And
but
it's not.
the point I was trying to make was the problem, and it may not relate, but the problem to what happens to Gael Scoilina, that parents who aren't in it for the Teanga agus an Gaeilge, what happens if they're sending the child for other reasons, for example, because it's a better school or it's a more exclusive school, Shinny on Shin.
Take them, yeah. But
here's the problem. One is, sorry to interrupt, but just because they're really good schools, right? Yeah. And because we don't have a national admissions policy, it tends to be sort of ambitious parents or parents in the know, or who will get the names down quick, so they can become a victim of their own success.
Yeah.
The second thing is, I have to confess, I wouldn't describe myself as an avid reader of Breed O'Brien, but I did have a quick glance out of professional necessity. And and the stats are, her stats
She's a
are
very
just wrong.
fine contributor, yeah.
Her stats are just wrong. I mean, Educate Together, percentage of kids, they stopped doing they stopped. That scheme has not been updated since 2010. But even then, the percentage of kids in Educate Together schools that were in Daesh areas was higher than the national average. So it's a really easy one to throw at sort of, it's all muesli-eating middle-class parents. But actually, that just depends on where they are. And the demand is great across the social spectrum.
Yeah, I think when you're
Harry.
dealing in percentages, sometimes it can be slightly misleading. So you're talking about the difference between 19% and 26% of only 90 schools. So you're talking about a very small number of schools. So you're talking about a difference of maybe 3 or 4 schools. So I wouldn't make too much of that. My own daughter goes to a Gael school, and the reason she goes to a Gael school is that my priority is in relation to language. I come from an Irish-speaking family, and I've heard the argument about Gael school before, that they're kind of elitist, that they're middle class, that they don't have a diversity of race.
Well, I have to say my experience, both from myself
I think that's,
and my own children, that was not true.
Like Lenny, I think that's a bogus argument. I think people focus in on a couple of schools in middle class areas and don't look at all the other Gael school throughout the country, are the other Educate Together schools throughout the country that have taken place. And I'd agree with Lenny that it's all about choice. And I think in cities, I think that's quite easy to achieve.
It's very, very hard. When Rory Quinn was minister, I think it was during Rory Quinn's time, they had voting right across
they were going
the country
to change the patronage
in the schools to change the patronage.
but I think
and the parents didn't want
but people can be people. People, they didn't, because they were happy with their schools.
Yeah.
And the thing about, the one thing, the observation I will make about religious schools is, if you look at the number of clergy in Ireland, it's diminished rapidly. And our notion of a Catholic school or a Protestant school nowadays bears no relation to the notion of a school maybe 20 or 30 years ago. And the religious aspect of it is small in the overall context of thing. My daughter goes to a school which is Catholic, but I wouldn't say that the Catholic ethos in the school is predominant. Whereas maybe 30 years ago or 40 years ago, when I was going to school, when I started off in Bunskull, it would have been the dominant ethos. So you're seeing a society that's becoming increasingly secular, and it becomes a component of those schools, not the overriding or dominant one.
But the thing about ethos is a very funny one. We have a friend who is Jewish, but non-practicing and non-believing, to tell you the God and honest truth. And he married a woman who is a Catholic atheist, for want of a better word to explain it. And the kids were getting nothing in his view. And so he decided that it was better that they go to the Jewish thing, so they would have an identity and an ethos that they could.
It reminds me of that old Woody Allen joke where he said, he was an atheist and his wife was an agnostic, and they couldn't decide which religion not to bring the kids up.
That kind of thing, yeah. But I could understand the thinking that you do want somebody to have values and to think about values and all of those kind of things. So just saying, you don't want a Catholic ethos. Loads of people do want a Catholic ethos.
They do, but other people don't. I think it becomes a question of choice. I think the big difficulty in relation to it is outside the cities and the big population areas, where only one school is available locally, and that is going to be a problem.
But
that people will
then there
have
isn't the admissions. I think the admissions, correct me if I'm wrong, that the admissions policy of you need a baptismal cert to get in really only applies in Dublin, where there's pressure on spaces.
And where schools are oversubscribed. Yes. But when you go down the country, if you have a parent who doesn't want their child to go to a Catholic school, or to a Church of Ireland school, or to a Jewish school, there's going to be a difficulty because those schools aren't available. Exactly. And that is a problem that will have to be addressed.
What happens is they just exclude them from religious education classes. I mean, I have friends down in Cavan, for example, they just don't go into the religious education.
In which case, they're not sort of fully part of the school life. Listen, it didn't kill me. I'm not saying, although
I don't think it did. No.
I do remember a brilliant moment when we were in Jewish prayers, which there was a sheet, we'd all stand there and there was a sort of senior kid in the school who was responsible for running junior prayers, and everybody was mumbling and not doing what they're supposed to do, and he came out with the immortal line, "Look, the faster you pray, the faster you get out," which I brilliant.
Every religion has discovered that, I think. I think so. Well, how did you approach it, Tara?
My children go to Catholic schools, and I'd like to assure Lenny that I actually think one of the reasons is they teach very good. I think they have had to change.
Sure.
The same point that Harry made. One of the jokes in our house at the moment actually is that my son loves going in early, and there's a mass for Lent, and they chase them out of the cupboards. The kids all hide in cupboards, in the loos,
to avoid it.
And the teachers chase them all in, and you all have to go in. And he's been in mass more now in the last few weeks, probably, than he has been in a long time. But he said, and then the priest points down, and somebody has to read. So you don't even know when you go in. So it's been a very big learning experience because he had to go up and read one day. But what I do think is good, and I think maybe parents like us, we wanted a school that had an ethos. I absolutely agree with you, Lenny. And I found schools that had ethoses that I could. And I don't see my children being trained to be something isolationist, or I think they're actually be really learning.
I think it's exactly that. It's just that let's not have a system where we just have the schools as they are and then divide kids off. Let's just have schools where there's a diversity of ethos and where we can reflect the changes in the demographics of the society we're in the education system. But as opposed to the sort of, it's a sort of one size fits all, and if you don't more or less fit in, you don't get the full experience. I mean, I just love the fact that, and I totally recognise that there are brilliant schools, and particularly, I mean, my wife's Polish, right? And just me trying to learn Polish and the kids speaking both languages, I thought if they were speaking we thought about Gael School, but I thought if there's, my Irish is appalling. I thought I can just about handle trying to do the Polish English thing. I don't know if we can handle 3 languages, but like even out in Balbriggan, the 2 schools, there's a Gael School and an Educate Together, which share the same building, and that's brilliant cross-pollination, cross-fertilisation as well.
Caller was in to say, in the town where I teach, there's an Educate Together school, a Church of Ireland school, and 2 schools with a Catholic ethos. God, you're lucky wherever you are. It doesn't tell me where it is. In the last few years, we, in one of the Catholic schools, have enrolled a number of Muslim children whose parents chose the Catholic school over all the others. Your guest is lucky that he's found a great school, but I don't think you can generalise to assume all Educate Together schools are equally great. Well, I suppose you can't generalise it at any school.
I mean, that's one generalisation you can make.
I'm principal of a Catholic primary school with 75% of the children coming from countries other than Ireland. That brings great religious diversity. There's no exclusion, no separation. It's joyful, inclusive, respectful and celebratory of diversity, religious or otherwise. How about that?
That's
that
great.
Sounds pretty well perfect, doesn't it? We'll be going on to another topic in a few moments, but first of all, we'll take a break.
Podcast The Marian Finucane Show at rte.ie/radio.
There's simply nothing more